Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of IGC webinars that will provide information to potential applicants on the types of research proposals that we're looking for. We hope that these information sessions will give you a better sense of our expectations on what an ideal project looks like. They will also present information on our key areas of focus, our model for influencing growth policy, and on research proposal development. So just an introduction, I'm Shahid Wazir Ali, head of the research program at the IGC. And today I'm very pleased to welcome Oriana Bandiera, Professor of Economics at LSE, and also IGC Research Program Director and Steering Group member. Oriana has been closely involved with the IGC for many years and has played a very central role in proposal evaluation and selection. And so I think is ideally placed to answer some of your questions. I also want to thank participants for submitting questions in advance. We've selected a sample of these questions that we thought were most relevant to today's session, which I will be directing to Oriana in the first part of the session. We have about 30 minutes, which will hopefully leave some time at the end for questions from the audience as well. So if you have a question, please send it to us via the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. So let's begin. The first question, Oriana, comes from Rita Tumukunde, who works with the Ministry of Agriculture in Rwanda. And is a pretty broad question, which is, what is the typical criteria used for evaluating a research proposal at the IGC?
Hi. Connection, because this keeps breaking up.
Okay. So the first...
Now it should be more stable. Go ahead.
Okay. The first question is from Ritu Tumukunde, who works at the Ministry of Agriculture in Rwanda. And her question is, what is the typical criteria used for evaluating a research proposal at the IGC?
Very good. So there are two types of projects that get funded. Projects that push the research frontier and projects that do useful analysis that can inform government policy. So the second type of project doesn't have to be research frontier type of analysis, but it has to be competently done. So the question that we ask when deciding whether to fund projects that inform policy is whether policy will be better because of that information or worse. Because if research is poorly done, it can actually hurt, because you can say, well, my policy is being based on these empirical results, but if the empirical results are wrong, you're essentially giving credibility to a policy that doesn't necessarily have that credibility from the research side. So what we use to judge those projects is whether the empirical methods are sound and the data is appropriate for the question. And then it could be, a research piece that cannot be published anywhere because similar research has been done in many other settings, but it can be still very useful to inform government policy. Those projects get funded.
I think that's quite straightforward. Okay, so second question is from, I see that we have the speaker, the attendee over here. So Patricia Naluwuza has a question. Patricia, if you can ask your question. Patricia seems to be on mute, so I'll just ask the question. So Patricia Naluwuza from the School of Economics at Makerere University asks a question more around methodology. So what specific methodologies does IGC find relevant in a study? Is IGC inclined towards RCTs, and is it okay to only use secondary data for a given study?
So we don't have any methodological requirements other than the method has to be appropriate to the question that you're asking. So if it is a question that can be addressed with secondary data, that's perfectly fine. More and more in economics, we're using administrative data for high-income countries. There's lots of studies from Scandinavian countries that use admin data, now increasingly so from the US. So if you have admin data of good quality, that's absolutely fine. We go by the importance of the question and the quality of the analysis. We are not religious in any way about the methods.
Thanks, Oriana. So moving on, third question is from Daniel Twesige, who is also with us. Daniel, would you like to direct your question to Oriana?
Thank you very much. I'm called Daniel from Ines, and my question is, I've tried several times writing, but I don't get successful. So what are the good criteria for writing a convincing proposal?
So that's easier said than done. At the core of a successful proposal is a good idea, right? So you must have an idea which is either a very big improvement in the research field or something that can be really useful for policymakers. So once you have that great idea, you need to have appropriate data to pursue that idea and appropriate methods, okay? Often less is more. I see a lot of proposals that get rejected because they try to do too much and they don't give enough detail on what they're doing because they're trying to do too much. So I think it's very important to always keep in mind that the person who's reading the proposal doesn't know anything about the research. And this is very difficult to do because it's written by somebody who knows a lot about it. So you often tend to forget the most, not you, just everybody in general, tend to forget the most important things, which is what research question are we addressing? Literally, you need to write down a 1 line or 2 lines at most questions, okay? So does paying teacher more lead to better results? This is the question I'm addressing. Very often proposals don't have a well-defined question. The second ingredient is to say very shortly why that question is important. And then you should say which data you use to answer the question and why the data are appropriate. And the final thing is what type of policy the question can inform. So you just always have to have these ingredients. The question, literally, you have to write, does X help Y? Okay? Don't worry if it sounds too simple, that nothing can be too clear. You can never be too clear. Right? I don't know if this helps.
Yeah, and just to follow on that, to Daniel and the rest of the participants, we'll be having another session on the 25th where we will go into more detail about how you can structure your answers more clearly and in a more well-defined manner as it relates to the proposal form as well. So I encourage everyone to attend that session also, which I think will help you. Okay, moving along. Another question. This is from Braze Alvarez Pereira from Nova SBE, Nova Africa. And the question is, what is the relative weight given to research potential versus direct policy relevance in the evaluation of IGC proposals?
So this is very similar to the question that I answered earlier. There are 2 criteria. You can have almost 0 research contribution in the sense that the question has been asked and answered already, but you do a modification which makes it useful for the country. In that case, the project will still be funded. So take any any intervention that has been done. For instance, we did an intervention in Zambia where we advertised the career potential of of community health assistant jobs. So if you were to replicate that intervention one-to-one in another country, that in itself wouldn't be publishable in a top journal because it's the same intervention, but it would be extremely useful to know whether the results replicate. So that type of thing could be funded.
Yeah. Thanks. And the next question is from, hold on. Yombo Eugene Arnaud. I want to see if this person is with us. Yes, Yombo, would you like to direct your question to Oriana? I can see you on the panel. Okay, I'll do it for you. So Yombo asks, are you open to more qualitative approaches, specifically in the political economy area?
So, the IGC funds research in economics. Economics is intrinsically a quantitative discipline. We are not, we're not even qualified, I think, to judge purely qualitative proposals. If it's a mixed method, so if you have some, quantitative analysis, which is motivated by, say, focus groups, by all means, that's very welcome. Or if you have some ex post interviews, or if you have some text analysis, that's all fine. So, using qualitative methods to support the main analysis is fine, but purely qualitative proposals is not the subject. It's not subject matter that we deal with.
Yeah. Moving on, Sebastian Renner from the Mercator Research Institute on the Global Commons and Climate Change asks, what are the key topics and research areas that the IGC State Board wants to support?
So broadly, it's very broad. So if it is of interest to the government, or if it is of interest to researchers, it will be funded. I think we have some topics. So if we look at research, there are some topics that have been under-researched. For instance, all the public finance side, all the taxation, how to raise taxes, those type of topics would have a better chance just because there is less done. So on the research side, I would say that anything that has to do with the organization of the state and anything that has to do with the tax side of the state would be very, very much welcome. Also, anything that has to do with state capacity. So also state capacity in collecting data, for instance, like if you wanted to do an exercise that enables the government in your country to have better data collection, that would be, that would be very, very welcome. From a policy point of view, really anything that's demanded by the government, but it's mostly on the micro side. So we don't do exchange rate policies, we don't do inflation policies, and like that's not.
Yeah. I mean, I would encourage everyone to go to the IGC website, and under the funding section, you'll see a subsection called research priorities, which will give you in detail the kind of thematic focus areas, like descriptions around each of those, which will be useful for you when you're putting together your proposals. Another question, again, more around research design, is from Sushmita Chatterjee, who is assistant professor at Manindra Chandra College in Calcutta in India, who asks, how important is the size of a sample in a research study?
That really depends on what the question that you're asking is, right? Because if you're asking a question about, say, the most effective form of local government, and you have, 50 localities in your country, then the optimal sample size is 50. If you're asking a question at the individual level, then it depends, again, what the question is and how many people it would affect. So it really depends on the research question.
Yeah.
Yes, no.
Daniel Agnes from UC Berkeley asks, can funding from this call be used as part of a larger project, for example, to expand a survey's existing sample, or will more competitive applications be standalone projects?
No, absolutely. We do pump priming, we do anything that we think can help the mission of the IGC. So it can be used to run a specific survey, it can be used to run another wave. For instance, something that economists very rarely do is to have long panels. So if you ran an intervention 10 years ago, and now you think you want to go back because it might be interesting to see the effect of the intervention 10 years later, that's something that we'd be very happy to fund.
Yeah. Just a couple more. So this is, again, quite a broad question coming from Ian Kusimakwe, who writes from the International Growth Research and Evaluation Center, which is, what do you recommend as the best practices for a first-time applicant?
I think, the first thing is the question. You really must be very clear on the question that you're asking and why that question is worth answering. That is the most important thing. Then, you have to be very clear on how you're going to address the question. Okay. Now, actually, for the sake, because this is actually really something quite difficult to communicate. So I'm going to try and do it with an example. So I'm going to share some slides, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay. So now I'm going to show you different versions of the same research question. So this comes from a paper of mine. Let's see if I find it. There. Let me put it big. Can you see this? Okay. So imagine that this is one version of a research question. Okay. I'll just give you a tiny bit of time to read it. Okay. Now, this is another version. Okay. And now, which is better? Okay. Show you. Okay, let's look at this one. Right? Social relations between agents shape behavior in many settings. Their effect on organizations can be positive, negative, everything in between. It's key to understand whether this happens and when. What's the research question here? There is really no research question. Okay? Do you understand any of this? Probably not. Somebody who has already read the paper can understand that. Somebody who has already thought about it can understand that. But you cannot understand it because you've never seen this. Now, this is the positions that we are in when we read the proposals. We have no idea what you're trying to do. So if you start with this level of details, you will never understand what's going on. What about this one? This one is better because here is a problem, okay? Delivering public service to remote areas is difficult. Here is a common solution. And the question is this a good solution? Okay? Economists can help. So you see the difference between these two approaches. The second is way shorter, many fewer details, but at the same time makes clear things that everybody can follow. Let me see. So that is very true for proposals as it is for papers. Okay? As I was replying earlier, less is more. Many proposals fail because there's too much. Either too many things that you try to do or too many details on the one thing that you try to do. You just have to go for one idea.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Basically, simplicity, clarity, and assume that the reader does not have the knowledge that you have.
Exactly. I can do more if you want.
I think just because of the amount of time we have,
Yeah.
I'm getting a couple of questions from the audience as well. One comes from Sadia Hussain, which is, how do you write a proposal without overcommitting? While on paper, the research design might be foolproof, however, implementation in the field might not be as simple, which I think is a good question.
That is, that is the trick that we all have to deal with, because either you write the proposal after you've done the research, and that's the only way of knowing whether it's going to work out. So don't worry about it. I think everybody knows that research is uncertain and is subject to a lot of shocks that can make things change. What matters, though, is that you've taken into account what could go wrong. So, for instance, if it's a research project in collaboration with the government, you want to have in place agreements with the government before applying for funds. Okay, saying, oh, I will contact the government of Zambia and ask them if they want to run this experiment with me, will not get funding because it's too uncertain whether you're going to have a partner or not. So, try to eliminate the uncertainty that you can eliminate, and to have systems in place that allow you to maneuver and change the research if needed. But then again, you cannot foresee everything. So that's perfectly understood.
Yeah. And then another question from Lubna Naz, which is, does IGC consider research proposals submitted by multidisciplinary teams?
We do, but again, IGC deals with economics. So it can be a multidisciplinary team. It has to be an economics question with economics methods.
Yeah. Okay, do we have any other questions from the audience? I'm just trying to look through them. If not, I think we can begin to wrap up here. Okay, we have one more question. No, we've already asked that, which is on qualitative analysis. I think she's answered that already. Okay, so I think
Daniel's got his hands up.
Oh, Daniel's got his hand up. Yes, Daniel, would you like to ask another question?
Okay, thank you very much. I want clarification on that issue that Oriana has talked about, Professor, about that they only finance researches from economics. How do you take this public finance, as some of the issues you have talked about, the public finance and the tax? Do you take them in economics, or they are multidisciplinary?
Sorry, no. So the question, we don't look at the affiliation of the applicant. So you could be in a department of sociology and have an economics proposal. That's absolutely fine.
Okay.
So many people who do research in public finance are in public policy schools, or in other departments. That's absolutely fine, as long as the research, the question, the proposal is of interest to researchers in economics or policymakers and uses economics methods so that can be judged by us. That's totally fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And then finally, another question, which I think we've also answered before by Viola Asri on co-funding. Is it okay for researchers if researchers already have funding and need more funding, for instance, for specific project components such as a data collection or an intervention? I think we answered that earlier, saying that yes, absolutely fine. If you come with secured funding and you're asking for additional funding, for example, to fund an additional intervention or another component of a survey or a panel or whatever, I think it's fine.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So I just want to thank everyone for attending. I hope you found this useful. I want to thank Oriana as well. Just a reminder to let everyone know that we will be opening a call for proposals in the autumn of this year, directed primarily at PhD students and early career researchers. We will have at least 2 more webinars in August, similar to this one. One will be on policy engagement and co-generating research proposals, which will be on the 19th, and then a final one on writing good research proposals on the 25th. I encourage everyone to attend these as well. You can go onto the event section of the IGC website to register. And finally, we'll be sending out a short survey to gather your feedback on this session that we just completed, and we'd appreciate you taking 5 minutes to fill this out. So thanks, everyone. Thanks a lot for attending.